Before the world took shape, before islands rose from the sea, before sunlight touched the earth, there was only chaos, not the violent, churning chaos of storm and thunder, but something stranger, a formless void where heaven and earth had not yet separated, where substance and emptiness blurred into one another, like oil floating on water. The ancient texts describe it as jellyfish-like, drifting without purpose or direction, a realm that existed but had no being. In this primordial emptiness, the first sparks of consciousness emerged. These were the Kotoamatsukami, the separate heavenly deities who came into existence spontaneously, without birth or parent. They appeared and then hid themselves away, withdrawing into the fabric of creation itself. After them came generation upon generation of divine pairs, male and female principles manifesting in tandem, each one closer to the forms we would recognize as gods. 6 generations passed in this way, deity begetting deity, until finally the 7th and last pair emerged into the newly separating heavens. Their names were Izanagi and Izanami, he who invites and she who invites, brother and sister, twin souls, the final flowering of divine evolution before creation proper could begin. Unlike the generations before them, who had simply come into being and withdrawn, these two would act. These two would shape the world, standing together on the floating bridge of heaven, that impossible span connecting the divine realm to the waters below. They looked down at the chaos and understood their purpose. The elder gods had given them a task that would echo through all of Japanese history: to solidify the drifting lands, to bring forth the islands, to make creation manifest. The weapon they were given for this impossible work was the Amano no Hoko, the heavenly jeweled spear. Its shaft gleamed with embedded gems, each one containing a fragment of divine will, each one pulsing with the power to transform formlessness into form. Izanagi took the spear in his hands while Izanami stood beside him, and together they thrust the blade down through the bridge, deep into the churning waters below. The ocean resisted at first, thick and reluctant as unformed clay, but they stirred and stirred, dragging the spear through the brine in great sweeping circles. When they finally lifted the spear free, drops of salt water clung to its tip. Those drops did not fall back into the ocean. Instead, as they dripped from the jeweled blade, they hardened and solidified mid-air, piling upon each other until they formed a mass large enough to stand upon. The first island, Onogoro, the self-congealing island, a place that created itself through the will of the gods channeled through their sacred implement. It wasn't large, this first piece of solid ground in all of creation, but it was enough. It was a beginning. Descending from their heavenly perch, Izanagi and Izanami set foot on the island they had created. The ground was firm beneath them, the first solid thing in a universe of fluid chaos. Here, they knew, was where they would build their palace, where they would perform the rituals that would bring forth more islands, more gods, more creation. They erected a pillar at the center of the island, a great column reaching toward heaven. The Amenomihashira, the heavenly pillar. Around it, they constructed their dwelling, a palace 8 hyro in breadth, though some scholars insist the number 8 here means simply many or myriad, the sacred number standing in for infinity itself. But a palace and a pillar were not enough. They were 2 halves of a divine whole, and they recognized in each other something that called for union. Izanagi, observing their forms, spoke the words that would define not just their relationship, but the entire order of male and female in creation. My body has grown excessively in one place. Your body is lacking in one place. I would like to unite what I have in excess with what you lack, and thus give birth to land. Izanami agreed, and they devised a marriage ceremony befitting their divine nature. The ritual they created was elegant in its simplicity. They would walk around the heavenly pillar in opposite directions, and when they met on the other side, they would speak words of greeting before coming together. Izanagi went left. Izanami went right. They circled the pillar and met. At that moment, moved by the sight of her divine counterpart, Izanami spoke first. "What a lovely young man," Izanagi, pleased but troubled, replied. "What a lovely young woman." Yet, even as they spoke, he voiced his concern. It was not proper for the female to speak first. The order of things demanded that the male voice be heard before the female. that the active principle initiate and the receptive principle respond. They consummated their union despite this breach of cosmic protocol, and the result was catastrophic by the standards of creation. Izanami gave birth, but the child was deformed. Hiruko, the leech child, a being without bones, unable to stand or walk or fulfill any divine purpose. They placed the misshapen child in a reed boat and set it adrift on the waters, sending it away from the world they were meant to create. Their second child was no better, an island of foam called Awashima, so insubstantial and malformed that it too was not counted among their legitimate offspring. Disturbed by these failures, the divine couple ascended once more to the heavens to consult with the elder gods. The deities performed divination, reading the patterns of fate and cosmic order, and delivered their judgment. The woman had spoken first. This inversion of the natural order had tainted their union, producing offspring that reflected that fundamental wrongness. If they wished to create properly, they must perform the ritual again, this time with Izanagi speaking first when they met around the pillar. Returning to their palace on Onogoro, they circled the heavenly pillar once more. This time, when they met, Izanagi's voice rang out first. "What a lovely young woman!" Only then did Izanami respond. "What a lovely young man!" The difference was subtle in words but absolute in cosmic significance. With the proper order established, their union became truly generative. From it came the islands of Japan, in a carefully ordered sequence. First Awaji, then the four-faced island of Shikoku, then the powerful island of Kyushu, then Tsushima, Iki, Oki, Sado, and finally the greatest of all, Honshu, sometimes called Yamato, the Dragonfly Island. 8 great islands emerge from their divine coupling, each one a child of the gods, each one a piece of sacred geography that would one day hold human civilizations. But Izanami's creative power did not stop with islands. From her came the smaller islets that dot the Japanese coastline, and then, in a cascade of divine birth that filled the newly formed lands with presence and purpose, she gave birth to the kami themselves, gods of mountains, gods of rivers, gods of wind and trees and plains. The god of the sea emerged from her, and the god of harbors. Every aspect of the natural world that humans would one day name and revere came forth from Izanami in those early days of creation. Yet, even divine birth has its limits, and Izanami would reach hers in the most terrible way imaginable. Her final child was Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, also called Homusubi, the fire causer. As she labored to bring him into the world, his divine nature manifested before he was fully born. Flames erupted from her body, consuming her from within. The heat was unbearable, beyond anything even a goddess should endure. Her flesh burned, her immortal form twisted in agony, and from that pain, from her tears and her vomit and her bodily fluids, more gods were born even as she died. The goddess of clay, the goddess of water, deities of irrigation and agriculture, created from the suffering of their mother as she slowly succumbed to the fire that had come from her own womb. And then Izanami, the mother of islands, the mother of gods, the co-creator of Japan itself, died. The first death, the first ending in a world that had until that moment known only birth and beginning. Izanagi's grief was a force of nature unto itself. He cradled his dead wife, tears streaming down his divine face, and from those tears new gods emerged, deities of lamentation, of sorrow, of mourning. But grief soon transformed into rage. He looked at the fire god, the child whose birth had killed his beloved, and fury consumed him. Drawing his sword, the great blade called Totsuka no Tsurugi, he struck down his own son, severing Kagutsuchi's head in a single blow. The fire god's blood sprayed across the rocks, and where each drop landed, new deities sprang into being. 8 thunder gods, gods of mountains and metal. The blade itself, stained with divine blood, gave birth to more kami still. This was new, this violence, this destruction. Until Izanami's death, the world had been characterized only by creation, by addition, by the steady accumulation of divine presence and material form. Now there was death. Now there was rage. Now there was loss that could never be recovered. Izanagi buried his wife on Mount Hiba, at the border between the provinces of Izumo and Hoki, but burial could not contain his yearning. Death was too new, too strange, too wrong for him to accept. His wife had descended to Yomi, the land of the dead, a realm that had come into being to receive her. And Izanagi, in his grief and desperation, decided to follow. The entrance to Yomi lay somewhere in Izumo province, a dark passage leading down into the earth. No god had ever ventured there before because, until Izanami's death, there had been no reason for such a place to exist. But now it pulled at him. The knowledge that his beloved resided in darkness while he remained in the light. He descended the slope called Yomotsu Hirasaka, the flat hill of Yomi, walking down and down into depths where no sun had ever penetrated, where the air grew thick and warm and smelled of decay. Yomi was not fire and torment. The Japanese underworld held no concept of punishment or reward, no sorting of souls based on virtue or sin. It was simply the place where the dead went. All the dead, equally, inevitably. A realm of shadows and stillness, of moist decay and perpetual darkness. As Izanagi ventured deeper, he called out his wife's name, his voice echoing through the stagnant air, and from somewhere in the darkness, he heard a response. "Izanagi? Is that you?" Her voice was softer than he remembered, distant, as though coming from very far away despite being close enough to hear. "Why have you come here? You shouldn't be in this place." "I've come to bring you back," he said, moving toward her voice through the pitch black. "The world above is unfinished. We have work yet to do. I cannot complete it without you. Come back with me, beloved. Leave this dark place and return to the light." There was a long silence before she replied, and when her words came, they carried a weight that chilled him despite the warmth of the underworld air. "I cannot return. I have already eaten the food of Yomi, cooked in the furnace of this realm. Once one has partaken of the food prepared here, they belong to this land. I am bound to it now, Izanagi. I am part of this darkness." But Izanagi refused to accept this. His love, his desperation, his inability to conceive of a world that continued without her. These things made him persistent beyond reason. He begged, he pleaded, he invoked the work they had done together, the islands they had birthed, the gods they had created. Could she not ask the gods of Yomi for special dispensation? Could she not be released from this place by divine exception, worn down by his entreaties, or perhaps moved by the love that had driven him to descend to such a terrible place? Izanami finally relented. "Wait here," she told him, her voice fading as she moved away. "Do not try to look at me. Do not light any fire. Do not come any deeper into this realm. Stay exactly where you are, and I will go to plead with the gods of Yomi. Perhaps they will grant what you ask. But you must promise me. Do not look upon me while I am gone." Izanagi promised, and then he waited in the absolute darkness. Time moves strangely in the underworld, especially for an immortal god accustomed to the ordered progression of sun and moon in the world above. He waited and kept waiting, and the darkness pressed in on him from all sides. His impatience grew. His curiosity gnawed at him. What could be taking so long? Why had she forbidden him to look at her? The questions multiplied in his mind until finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, he took the comb from his hair, broke off one of its teeth, and set it aflame to serve as a torch. The light was small, barely enough to see by, but it was enough, and what it revealed would haunt him forever. Izanami lay before him, and she was no longer the beautiful goddess who had stood beside him on the floating bridge of heaven. Death had transformed her into something horrific beyond imagining. Her flesh was rotting, falling away from bones that showed white through the decay. Maggots writhed through her body, squirming and roaring with their own terrible life. 8 thunder gods had taken up residence in her corpse, wrapped around her limbs and torso like terrible decorations. She was decay personified, death made manifest, the opposite of everything she had once represented. Izanagi's scream echoed through Yomi, a sound of pure horror and betrayal. Betrayal of his promise, betrayal of his love, betrayal of the image he had carried of her in his mind. He turned and ran, fleeing back toward the passage that would lead him to the world of the living, running from the sight of what his beloved had become. Behind him, Izanami stirred, the goddess of death, humiliated and enraged that her husband had broken his promise and witnessed her shame. rose from her resting place. Her scream matched his, fury mixing with anguish. She commanded the Yomotsu Shikome, the hags of Yomi, the female demons of the underworld, to pursue him. She sent the 8 thunder gods that had been born from her decaying body. She sent an army of the dead to drag him back, to trap him in Yomi forever, as punishment for his violation of her trust. Izanagi ran through the darkness, but he was not defenseless. As the hags drew close, he tore the black vine from his hair and flung it behind him. The vine transformed into wild grapes, and the hags, distracted by hunger, stopped to devour them. When they resumed their pursuit, he threw his comb, which transformed into bamboo shoots that they stopped to eat. But these delays could only do so much. They kept coming. And behind them came the thunder gods, and behind them came Izanami herself, no longer pleading or negotiating but filled with divine wrath. As Izanagi neared the slope that led back to the world above, he saw trees bearing peaches. He plucked 3 of the sacred fruits and hurled them at his pursuers. The peaches, charged with divine power, drove back the demons and even the thunder gods. Only Izanami continued forward, pursuing him all the way to the entrance of Yomi. With the last of his strength, Izanagi seized an enormous boulder, a rock so large it would normally require 1,000 men to move, and dragged it into place, sealing the passage between the living world and the realm of the dead. On opposite sides of that massive stone, husband and wife faced each other for the last time, separated by a barrier that neither could cross. Izanami's voice came through the rock, thick with fury and grief. "If you abandon me here, beloved husband, I will kill 1,000 people every day in the land of the living. I will reach up from this place of death and pull the living down to join me, 1,000 souls each day to populate my realm." Izanagi, still shaking from what he had witnessed, still processing the horror of his wife's transformation, responded with equal determination. "If you kill 1,000 each day, beloved wife, then I will ensure that 1,500 are born each day. Life will always exceed death. Creation will always overcome destruction. The living will never be extinguished, no matter how many you claim." This was their divorce, not a legal proceeding or a simple parting, but a cosmic separation that established the fundamental rhythm of existence. Death and life would forever be locked in this balance. This eternal struggle where death claims but life replenishes, where Izanami rules the realm of darkness, while Izanagi presides over the realm of light. From that moment forward, they were no longer partners in creation, but opposing forces, necessary counterweights in the machinery of the universe. Approximately 1,000 people would die each day, just as Izanami had promised. And approximately 1,500 would be born, just as Izanagi had vowed. But Izanagi could not simply return to his work after what he had experienced. He was polluted, contaminated by his contact with death and decay. The impurity of Yomi clung to him like an invisible stain, a corruption that reached into his divine essence. In Shinto thought, death is the ultimate source of ritual impurity, a force that separates humans and gods alike from the clean, clear world of the kami. Having walked through Yomi, having breathed its air and touched its walls, having seen his wife's rotting flesh, Izanagi needed purification in its most complete form. He traveled to the land of Hyuga on the island of Kyushu, to a place called Awagihara near the mouth of the Tachibana River. There, he performed what would become the first and most important misogi, the ritual purification that would serve as the model for all such cleansings throughout Japanese history. He stripped away his clothing, and from each piece discarded, new gods were born, deities of purification, of rectification, of the correction of wrongs. His staff gave birth to a god, his belt, another. Each article he had worn into Yomi now produced its own divine offspring. Then, Izanagi entered the river itself. The water was cool and clear, flowing at the perfect rate, not too swift, not too slow, the middle way between extremes. He immersed himself completely, washing away the pollution of death, cleansing the taint of the underworld from his divine form. As he performed this purification, more gods came into being from the water that touched him, from the act of cleansing itself. But the most significant births were yet to come. When Izanagi washed his left eye, light burst forth. Not ordinary light, but the radiance of the sun itself, concentrated into divine form. From his left eye, emerged Amaterasu, the heaven-shining great August deity, the goddess who would rule the heavens and become the most revered kami in all of Shinto tradition. Her light was warm and nourishing, the power that makes plants grow and gives life to the world. When he washed his right eye, a cooler light emerged. This was Tsukuyomi, the moon god, master of the night, ruler of the tides and the silent hours when the sun withdraws. Some texts say Tsukuyomi was male, others leave the question ambiguous, but all agree the moon god possessed a calm, measured nature, the perfect complement to the brilliant Amaterasu. And when Izanagi washed his nose, a third deity burst forth, not light or calm contemplation, but raw, chaotic power. Susanoo, the storm god, emerged from this final cleansing, bringing with him the force of wind and rain, of thunder and lightning, of the wild, unpredictable aspects of nature that cannot be tamed or ordered. Some accounts say he emerged from Izanagi's breath instead of his nose, but the essential truth remains the same. From the purification ritual, the three most important deities in the Japanese pantheon were born. These three, Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo, are known as the Mihashira no Uzuno Mikoto, the three precious children. Their births marked a new phase in the divine order, where before there had been gods of individual mountains and specific rivers. Now there were gods who ruled over fundamental cosmic principles: the sun, the moon, the storm. Between them, they would govern all the heavens and establish hierarchies of divine power that would structure Shinto worship for millennia to come. There's a fascinating detail that appears in some versions of this tale, but not others: a divergence between the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki that reveals how, even in ancient times, there were competing understandings of these sacred events. In the Kojiki, the most widely accepted version, Izanami dies and Izanagi descends to Yomi, and the three precious children are born from Izanagi's purification alone, making them products of male divine power, responding to the trauma of death and impurity. But in certain variants found in the Nihon Shoki, Izanami never dies. She and Izanagi create Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo together through normal divine procreation, and Izanagi never descends to the underworld at all, instead retiring to the island of Awaji, where a shrine is dedicated to him. These differences are not contradictions, but rather different emphases, different ways of understanding the same cosmic truth. The Kojiki version, with its journey to Yomi and its horror and its purification, emphasizes themes of pollution and cleansing, of death as a force that changes everything, of the necessity of ritual to restore balance after contact with corruption. The Nihon Shoki variants, by eliminating the death and the underworld journey, preserve a vision of divine partnership continuing unbroken, of creative power shared between male and female principles. Both are true in the way myths are true, not as historical records, but as stories that explain how the world works, why things are the way they are, what humans must do to maintain harmony with the divine. The separation of Izanami and Izanagi, whether through death and horror or through peaceful retirement, establishes the fundamental duality that runs through all of existence: life and death, light and darkness, purity and pollution, creation and destruction. These are not moral categories in the Shinto framework, but natural ones, necessary opposites that define each other through their contrast. There is no death without life, no light without darkness, no joy without sorrow. Izanami's curse, 1,000 deaths each day, is balanced by Izanagi's vow, 1,500 births each day. The world continues because both forces are at work, because destruction makes room for new creation, because death clears the way for life. This myth also establishes the central importance of purification in Shinto practice. Every time a worshipper approaches a shrine and rinses their hands and mouth at the water basin, they are reenacting Izanagi's misogi, washing away impurity, so they can approach the kami in a state of cleanliness. Every time someone bathes in a sacred river or stands beneath a waterfall for spiritual cleansing, they are following the model set by the god who descended to the realm of death and emerged purified. The physical act of washing becomes a spiritual act, the water serving as a bridge between the mundane and the divine. The story of Izanagi and Izanami is ultimately a story about the price of creation. To make the world required not just power, but sacrifice. Izanami sacrificed her life, her beauty, her partnership with her divine husband. Izanagi sacrificed his wife, his innocence, his ignorance of death and decay. Together, through their love and their separation, through their creation and their destruction, they gave Japan its physical form and its spiritual structure. The islands exist because they were willing to act. The gods exist because they were willing to procreate. Death exists because Izanami was willing to give birth to fire. Life continues because Izanagi was willing to vow its persistence. And the legacy of their story resonates through Japanese culture in ways both obvious and subtle. The imperial family traces its lineage back to Amaterasu, who was born from Izanagi's purification, making every emperor a descendant of these primordial creators. Shinto shrines across the country honor various kami who were born from this divine couple, either directly or through the generations of gods that followed. The very geography of Japan, those 8 great islands and all the smaller ones surrounding them, is understood as the body of divine creation, sacred land formed from the union of cosmic principles made manifest as brother and sister gods. But perhaps the most profound legacy is the one embedded deepest in the cultural consciousness. The understanding that death is not an ending, but a transformation, that what dies creates space for what will be born. That loss and grief are not aberrations but essential parts of the cosmic order. Izanami rules Yomi not as a punishment, but as a necessity. Someone must govern the realm of death, must welcome the souls that leave the world of light, and give them a place in the darkness. Her transformation from creator to destroyer, from beautiful goddess to rotting corpse, from partner to adversary, mirrors the transformation that all things undergo when they move from existence into whatever lies beyond. The story refuses easy moral judgments. Izanami is not evil for threatening to kill 1,000 people each day. She is death, doing what death does. Izanagi is not good for vowing to create more life than death can claim. He is life, doing what life does. They are forces, not characters, principles, not personalities. And their separation was inevitable from the moment fire came into the world, because fire consumes, and what is consumed must die, and what dies must go somewhere. And that somewhere cannot be the same place as where the living dwell. So thank you for watching this complete journey through one of Japan's most fundamental myths. If you found this exploration of Izanagi and Izanami meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep explorations of mythology from around the world. The stories our ancestors told themselves about creation and death, about love and loss, about the forces that shape existence. These stories still speak to us across the millennia, still offer wisdom about how to understand our own place in the cosmic order. Until next time, may you walk in balance between light and darkness, between creation and letting go, between the memory of what was and the hope of what will be.